The day after Yud Aleph Cheshvan, yeah. Yesterday was the Yossi of Rachel Imenu, and it's the Yossi of the Razor. The Rebbe Rashab had an older brother whose name was Reb Zalman Aaron, Reb Shneir Zalman Aaron. The Razor was a big chassid, and he was the son of the Rebbe Marash. And when the Rebbe Marash was nostalgic, he moved away from Lubavitch. There's all kinds of explanations for why he moved away from Lubavitch, but I would like to believe from the city of Lubavitch. He was a chassid of his younger brother. Yeah? He moved away from Lubavitch, and there's all kinds of reasons, but I think one of the reasons he moved away from Lubavitch is because he wanted to take away any question about who's Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab, his younger brother, said about him, about his older brother, Zayn anivis kenich euch nicht. Can you imagine? The Rebbe Rashab said about the Razor, Zayn anivis kenich euch nicht. In other words, the degree was made that the Razor was bottled to his younger brother, considering who he was. The Rebbe, it was a Greiser, and he was his brother was the Rebbe, and he was the Chassid. And there's Kama V'Kama Sipurim about the relationship between the Razor and the Rebbe Rashab and his younger brother, the Rebbe. And one of them is, it's a very Geshmaka Maise. Like I said, there's a lot of stories that there was Reish Vav, I think. There are three special events that the Friedrich Rebbe talks about, or four, in his childhood when a lot of people came to Lubavitch. One of them was by the Chasane. In the summer of Reish Beis, the Rebbe Rashab had a younger sister who would later become his mechatenis there. The younger sister's name was Musya. Her son was Mendel Horenstein. She was the Rebbe Marash's youngest daughter. She was very, very young when the Rebbe Rashab was nostalgic. So she was the Rebbe Rashab's sister. And the Rebbe Rashab had taken to the chuppah. I don't know what the Unterfire was, but the chuppah was a Reish Beis. So everybody came. Then there was, of course, the Friedrich Rebbe's Chasane, which was in the summer of Reish Zayin. But something was in Reish Vav, a year early. I don't know exactly what it was. Everyone was in Lubavitch. Because it was Simchas Torah. And it was a very shturim-dik Maimed Matziv. So at that Fabrengen, they were sitting. And suddenly the Rebbe Rashab says to his older brother, Kum lo meheren chsidis von Tanya. They were sitting at a Fabrengen. It had something to do with Mishpoch. I don't remember what it was. Come, let's hear chsidis from the Rebbe Marash. So the two of them stood up. They walked away from the people, from the table. They stood 10-15 minutes. The tears were pouring, and they just stood. They stood. Now, for like 10-15 minutes, they turned around and they came and sat back down. So when the Razor sat down, the Rebbe Rashab had Gonish gesagt, the Razor said the following words: A Litvak gläubt nicht, bis zählt über mit der Hand. A Litvak doesn't believe. A Litvak doesn't. He has to count. A Litvak is nicht kamaimen. He has to count everything. Ausgerechnet, he says. Aber as erzählt und es stimmt. But if a Litvak counts and it adds up, in other words, I just heard Chidus from the Rebbe Maharaj. As erzählt und es stimmt, he said, a Litvak also is a believer. And when a Litvak is a believer, it's an Ershtag Leibig. This is one story from the Razor. The Friedrich Rebbe describes that the Razor was a Moedik Abal Maise. He had a lot of Sipurim. The Rebbe Rashab did not have so many Sipurim. The Rebbe Rashab did not go to Chassidish Fabrengens. He didn't go to Chassidish Fabrengens, except if his father, the Rebbe Marash Fabreng, the Rebbe Rashab was Mamayit and going to Chassidish Fabrengenischen. Farvos, is gelegen in Chassidus allein, und hat nicht gehad kein Zeit, was arum Chassidus is. That's more or less the wording. The Rebbe Rashab was involved in Chassidus itself, and he didn't have time for was arum Chassidus is, what's around Chassidus, But the Razor was a Moedik Abal Mais, and he had Sforim. He had 4 or 5 or 6 notebooks, Machberesen, where he wrote on Sipurim. He wrote very small essays, very clear. The Razor was an Eidim by the Nezhener. The Razor was an Eidim by, he also married a first cousin, by B'Shalneach of Nezhener. And I think that he heard a lot of stories from his Shred, from the Nezhener, B'Shalneach. The Friedrich Rebbe used to borrow these notebooks from his uncle to read them. It was 5 or 6 notebooks full of Sipurim with very good sources. When the Razor passed away, he passed away Yud Aleph Tishrei, Yud Aleph Cheshvan, Tov Reish Ayin Aleph, I think. No, Samach Tes, Tov Reish Samach Tes. That means this year is 90 years since his Histalkus. So it's a Shkocha process that we actually stopped it. Yesterday was his Yortzeh. And he took all of these Machberesen and he burned them. He took the ash, he put it in a bag, and then they should put it in with him in the Tzion, in the cave. I think he passed away in Vitebsk. So first of all, we know that the Rebbe Rashab said, "Amay Mechsidus, Lahavini Navelas." Chayisora, Tofresh Ayin Samachtas. The Rebbe Rashab said, "Amay Lahavini Navelas." Granted, there's a Maisa which isn't true. Now, why would you tell a story it's not true? Because it's a Geschmack Maisa. There's a story which Yossi Jacobson brings. I'll tell you the Maisa. I'll tell you why it's not true. Yossi Jacobson has in his Rishimis. There's a sefer called Zikaron of Bnei Yisrael, which is the Rishimis of the Yossi Jacobson, Rabbi Jacobson, Yossi Jacobson, all of Ashur, which was published. And in there, they tell a story that the Razah passed away, I think, on a Wednesday, Chayesara Wednesday, and Shabbos, the Rebbe Rashab said, "Amayim loving in Avelas," and he didn't even know. He didn't know about the Histalkus of his brother. And there's a Hanocha. The Ksavia, the Rebbe Rashab did not write them. Mami, there's Hanocha from Chassidim. So in the olden days, there was a Hanocha of half a Maimah, just a half. That's all they had. And later, much later, they found the Friedrich Rebbe's Hanocha. The Friedrich Rebbe himself wrote a Hanocha of the whole Maimah. And it says in the beginning that we got news that the Razah is Nistalik about him. And the Tatig is this in Shiva. And in the middle of the Shiva, Shabbos, Chayisari, he said the Maimah loving in an Avela. So that's the story that Sidim of Yamel Gehed, that the Rebbe said the Maimah without knowing. And then you have a Shiva for the Friedrich Rebbe. With the Friedrich Rebbe, first of all, you have the whole Maimah. And second of all, he writes at the top of the Maimah, there's Oin Kuman Ayediyah. News reached us, the Rebbe and the Rebbe's son. I don't think they were in Lubavitch. About the Histalkus of his older brother, the Razah, and he said Chassidus. So the Rebbe Rashab asked the Friedrich Rebbe if he copied over those notebooks. If he copied the notebooks. So the Friedrich Rebbe said, I think he said he didn't have permission. And the Rebbe Rashab was disappointed. And he said so much to the effect, Amat Nidgevol is a siman Amat Nidgedav. It was a pity. He says, if he didn't want, it's a siman that he didn't need to. Now, of course, the Rebbe Rayatz had the Tzelt Maises, the Friedrich Rebbe told stories, and he didn't necessarily tell us each story where he heard it, so it's conceivable that many of the Sipurim came from his uncle. The Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe stories, the Friedrich Rebbe said about himself, as ich de Tzela Maisen hen sich misnagde make through. When I tell the story, even misnagde was Friedrich Rebbe is Maises, everything. But the
stories were from the Rebbe.
So a lot of one of the big sources of his Sipurim was from his grandmother, the Rebbe's Nifke. He also heard stories from his father. There's a story. I'll waste a few more minutes or a few more seconds. It's a very interesting story. The Friedrich Rebbe says that his relationship with his father was such that he would knock on the door and walk in. He wouldn't wait for the Rebbe to say Arai. He would knock on the door and walk in. He didn't have to wait to be allowed in. Once the Rebbe Rashab went to the Ehel of the Rabbeim, the Rebbe Tzaddik and the Marash, and he said by the Ehel, more or less this Tayichin. I know this because the Friedrich Rebbe writes it. Du Veistach, he said to his father, Du Veistach. I didn't go to Chassidische Verbrengen. Und du Veistach, and you know that this that I didn't go to Chassidische Verbrengen is nicht gewesen, weil ich habe sich gefoilt, nor weil ich mich gelegen in Chassidis allein, und ich habe nicht gehad kein Zeit, für was arum Chassidis is. I was busy with Chassidis itself. I didn't have time for what's around Chassidis. And the Rebbe Rashab said to his father, to his grandfather, ich will haben die Shleimus eich. That was the wording. He used the word Shleimus. I want to have this Shleimus also of Sipurim. So he went to the oil, and this was what he asked. When he came back from the oil, he told the Friedrich Rebbe that from now on, when you knock, you can't walk in until I let you. And then from then on, the Friedrich Rebbe, I started to hear stories from my father. A whole new echos of Sipurim. I had no idea where they came from. And I never asked him. But I was makasha the two things. That my father said I shouldn't walk in until I knocked. Because upon him, he had visitors that the Friedrich Rebbe didn't want him to see. They would push and come and tell him, this is a story. So he had stories from his father also. Anyway, so yesterday was his Yortzeit of the month. It's 90 years. So it's Hashgacha Pratis. Okay, let's learn Tanya now. Let's learn Tanya. We're on page Ches Amid Beis. That means page 16. This is your father's father or your mother's father? What was his last name? He was not a Cain, he was not a Levi. Right? He was one of the three brothers, was the father of the three brothers. No, Yidden came to America in those days when alle Kinder and anyone that could live from. They may have been Boshut of people, but they were big tzaddikim. They were the Mesiras Nefesh Mamish. We can't verstehen. We can't understand how difficult it was. We can't understand what kind of ness it was. Okay, we're going to start more or less in the middle of the page, okay? We're going to start with the line begins with the word B'chol, where it says, V'lochein nimshala ha'toyro l'mayim. V'lochein nimshala ha'toyro l'mayim. This is where we're going to start. So we started learning the Indian of Teda Mitzvahs, right? I guess the way to put it is, the lowest level of the neshama, involved in the lowest inyanim of our relationship with the Eibishter, reaches Atzmas Amhus. The lowest level of the neshama is the physical person in the physical world doing physical things, and the lowest inyan in the lakus is mitzvahs maisiyas and limud ateidah b'gashmiyas, and this is how you touch the Eibishter. If you remember the class, a yid is taka lakus, a Jew is godliness, the neshama is godliness, but the godliness is concealed. In order to reveal the godliness, you need Teda and mitzvahs. But which level of Teda and mitzvahs helps the neshama discover what it is? Mitzvahs maisiyas, physical mitzvahs done in thought, speech, and action. Limud Teda done in thought, speech, and action. This is more or less, this is the klolos, what we learned last week. So the Rebbe now continues and he says, V'lachein, and this explains why. You have the place, it's more or less the middle of page 16. That means Daf Ches Amid the base. V'lachein, therefore, you have the place, yeah? It's more or less the middle of the page, yeah? By a period, the end of the line. 16. Page 16. It's Peirik Dalet, the second Amid. V'lachein, and therefore, Nimshal HaTeira L'mayim. The Teira is compared to water. Ma mayim, just like water. Yedem imakom gaveya l'makom nomach, descent from a higher place to a low place. Kacha Teira, the same is true of the Teira, that Yarda mimkein kveda, the Teira descended from its glorious place. Shiritzeinei v'chachmasa yizbarach, which is how it's one with Hashem, the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says again, Ve'eraisa v'kuchabricha kol achad, the Teira and Hashem are one. So it's not just the Chochma of the Eibishter and the Ratzon of the Eibishter. It's Atzmas Amhus, like it's explained in Shadichet V'Emunah, Bariches, Perichas, Peritas, Periyud, that the Ratzon of the Eibishter and the Chochma of the Eibishter are one with the Eibishter. So therefore, when a person is learning Torah, he's connected, he's one with the Eibishter himself. V'leis machshava tfisa beit klam. That there is no kli, there is no vessel which can be tefes that can hold him. You can't hold Atzmas Amhus. Why can't you hold Atzmas Amhus? Because he's bligvol. Hashem has no limit. Something which has no limit cannot be put into a finite vessel. Yeah, but nevertheless, he's in Teda mitzvahs. Even though you cannot put Kayochel, the infinite Eibishter, the true Eibishter, into a gvul, into a finite form, the reality is that because of the principle of Eraisa v'Kuchabricha Teda and the Eibishter are one. And again, as we're learning it in Peirik Dalet, it doesn't only mean Teda and the Eibishter are one. It means mitzvahs and the Eibishter are also one. We don't make a distinction with the Teda mitzvahs at this point. This we're going to do later in the next Peirik and Peirik Yimon. Okay, but at the meantime, they're both the same thing. So Taka, you can't hold the Eibishter. When you learn Teda, you do a mitzvah, you are holding the Eibishter. Why? Because the Eibishter and his Chochma are one, the Eibishter and his Ratzon are one, and it's like water that descends from a high place to a low place without any change whatsoever. Umisham, and from there, Nasa, it has journeyed, V'yadan has descended, B'seiser HaMadregis, through the secret of steps. What these words B'seiser HaMadregis mean exactly, I don't know. Madrega from step to step, B'hishtal Shalus, through the chain reaction of worlds, Ad, until Shenislapsha B'dvarim Gashmi. That the Eibishter himself, Hu V'chachmasa Yachad, the Eibishter and his mitzvahs are one, descends until it manifests, it becomes enclosed in physical things. And the matters of this world, sheheim, which are reiv mitzvahs haTeira kekulam, the vast majority of the mitzvahs of the Torah. And the Rebbe says it's such a reiv, it's such a vast majority that it's kekulam. It might as well be all of them, as well as the Torah of Hilchesein and their laws. And in Kuntas Achron, there's a place where it's indicative that when you're learning a halacha of a mitzvah, it's part of the mitzvah. When you're learning Torah, it's a besondere Sache, limud al-Torah. When you're learning the Torah of a mitzvah, or even the kavanah of a mitzvah, it's considered a mitzvah. And then he says, "Ubetzirufei eisiyes gashmis," and the formation of physical letters, b'diyoy ala sefer, ink on paper, esrim v'abos sfarim, of the 24 sfarim of the Tanakh, shebetera neviim eksuvim, of Torah neviim and ksuvim, kedei, and the reason is shetehei kol machshava tfisa ben, that it becomes possible for any machshava. And machshava again means thought literally, but figuratively it means a kli, a vessel. Any keli can hold Hashem. How can you hold Hashem? In Torah there is the Atzmas Eitzof, in Torah there is the Eibishter, and in Mitzvahs there is the Eibishter. Va'afilu, moreover, not only can you hold the Eibishter in thought, but b'chinas dibur u'maisa. You can hold the Eibishter in a word, you can hold the Eibishter in an action. Shalamato mi madreges machshava, which is lower than the level of thought, that through Torah and Mitzvahs, says that the Eibishter is grasped through them, umislabeshes behen, and is revealed in them. So in Yiddishkeit, you have the Eibishter. In Yiddishkeit, you have the Eibishter. As difficult as this may be to understand, or perhaps as impossible as this to understand, on the one hand we say Hashem is unavailable. Leis machshav zidachal. You can't hold God. And it makes sense. Leis machshav zidachal. Of course you can't hold the Eibishter. The Eibishter ain't safe. The Eibishter is ligvul, Lashon HaShas. The Eibishter is fire, and the Eish is say the fire burns. You can't have the Eibishter. But in Torah and mitzvahs, in any word of Torah, in any action of a mitzvah, you have Poshet, Kipshute, Atmas Amhus. The Eibishter himself is in the Torah mitzvahs that we learn, Torah mitzvahs that we say, and the Torah mitzvahs that we do. So now let me pause here for a moment, or maybe for more than a moment. Okay? I want to talk about this concept of tfisa first. I want to talk about this concept of grasping, of holding the Eibishter. That when you learn Torah and you do mitzvahs, you're holding the Eibishter. And I want to start with a word from the Rebbe's Rishimis. I think it may be a sikha also, but it's in the Rebbe's Rishimis. That means the Rebbe's journal, which was published after Gimel Tammuz. Everybody knows about the Yuman, the Rebbe's journal where he writes stories. But there's also the Divrei Torah of the Rebbe a lot. And in one of the Rishimis, the Rebbe makes a Hadron on Shas. He finishes Shas. And in the Hadron on Shas, the Rebbe says, I'm more than the Kavod, but it's so classic Rebbe. It's so exactly what you would expect from the Rebbe. You'd never think of it, but once he says it, of course, that's the Rebbe for you. The Mishnah says at the end of Shas, Loi mota HaKadosh Baruch Hu kli machzik bachal yisol ela Hashem. The translation of those words literally are, Hashem could not find a vessel that can hold blessing for the Jewish people except for peace. Loi mota HaKadosh Baruch Hu kli machzik bachal yisol. Hashem could not find a vessel that could hold blessing for the Jewish people except for peace. And of course, Shenemar ad Hashem eiz la'am yitin, ad Hashem yivarach la'am v'shal. That's how the Shas Mishnayos finishes. Masechta Uktzah. So the Rebbe has a kash. Why the double negative? It should say, Motza HaKadosh Baruch Hu kli machzik b'rachal Yisrael v'hu Hashem. Hashem found a kli which can hold the bracha that the Eibush has to give, which is peace. And Shneimar Hashem eiz la'am yitin, Hashem yivarach Hashem shalom. Why did it say loymot? He couldn't find except for Ella, right? Like ani loy nevreisi Ella l'shabash eskeni, ani lei bosi Ella l'farish trute shalmikra. There's a lot of double negatives, and the Rebbe has a sikha where he explains the rule of double negative, and he brings an eye from the Gemara. Every week comes out a sikha. And this is something which is very important, at least to know. Every week they give out a new sikha from the Rebbe. It's not new. It's Chiddush HaYishonis. They're redoing the sikhs in Lashon HaKodesh, and they do really a good job. And it's Pashta covered for the Rebbe. And they've already published 62 volumes of the Rebbe Sikhs in Hebrew. rewritten, annotated with Maramakemis and Ha'adas, and also they worked very hard on it, and they're holding now Lamed Aleph and Beis. So every week comes out a Sikha, and I try to learn these Sikhas Belina that I so often don't finish. But in my mind, how could you go home on a Friday night if you didn't learn the Sikha that came out Shabbos? So recently, I'm being Megala Kledi, there was a Sikha where the Rebbe explained, brother, Raya from a Gemara to the double negative, from a Shas. Loi Ella has a very specific connotation. When it says Loi Ella, I think it means even b'di'evet. Whenever the Chazal say it can't be any way other than this, so I think what the Rebbe put right from a Gemara that this even b'di'evet it can't be the other way. But I forgot. The Rebbe put right from Nigle for what this means. But the Rebbe, of course, analyzed every single word. So he asks, why does it say a double negative? So the Rebbe gives a push to the teretz. Loy mota kodesh baruch hu kli machzik brach li Yisrael is the same thing as leis machshava tfisa beiklal. Leis machshava tfisa beiklal makes sense. Leis machshava tfisa beiklal means no keli can hold the Eibishter. Why can no keli hold the Eibishter? Not because a pot hasn't created that large, because it's bli gvul. You can't put bli gvul on kli. A kli is gvul. So that's what the Mishnah says. You know why there's no kli that can hold the bracha the Eibush has to give Yidden? Because the bracha is bli gvul. It's not the pshat the Eibush hasn't yet created a pot or a wallet big enough to hold all the brachas. If the brachas are infinite, there's no way to hold them. So the first part of the statement is absolutely true. Is exactly the same thing as leis machshava tfisa beiklal. You can't hold the Eibishter. You can't hold the Eibishter's brachas. But then comes an Ella. There's an Ella. What's the Ella? Shalom. Peace. Why? Because what's the foundation of Shalom? How do you get along with your neighbor? I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but only bittul. Only bittul. With your metzias, you can't have peace. There's a video that they play often where someone came to the Rebbe who was involved in the Federation and the Reform, and he was talking to the Rebbe that all Jewish people should get along, and the Rebbe says to him straight, leave something from a Mashiach to them. It's almost like you get the distinct impression like the Rebbe is telling him it ain't going to happen, because you see their concept of peace, the Reform concept of peace, is compromise. You'll give in, I'll give in, we'll get along. The Rebbe's peace is princip, it's the Rebbe's emes shalom. What happened was, I don't know if you remember it, the Rebbe took the mihu Yehudi. And then at a certain point, the Rebbe spoke a Sikha. Remember, the Rebbe said the Sikha, where he basically said, stop, no more. Why? He says, those who need to know already. And to stop and hit your head against the Rebbe officially, I remember the Fabrengen Sikha, it was a weekday Fabrengen. It was the winter of Mentes. It was 30 years ago, around this time, you couldn't even Manta Cheshvan. I don't know if you know this, but it's quite famous that the Rebbe called him a good of Siddur Chabad. Right after Tishrei, Tavshin Mentes, 30 years ago, when he spoke a Sikha in his room, and the Sikha is Muga. And the Teuchen of the Sikha was giving over responsibility to Aguch. He talked about Shlichus and Shluchim. The Sikha it's an uncomfortable Sikha when you read it, but the Rebbe empowered certain people or everybody to appreciate the responsibility that they carry. But around the same time, maybe it was a little later, the Rebbe spoke a Sikha where he basically said that we're not going to scream at Yehudi. So the Reform, they took this as a capitulation. And the Rebbe gave in. So it was a big victory. So when they came, must have been that Nissen, the Rebbe had the Machne Yisrael Development Fund. So Mullah Button was introduced a number of people. That's the one where the Rebbe tells a lady, do you remember our conversation from 15 years ago? She almost fell down. And the Rebbe told her that she would be the head of, the Rebbe told her then that she would become the head of something, and it happened. But in that same meeting, one of the people told the Rebbe that he's very happy that the Rebbe is talking about peace. And we could all get together. And the Rebbe says to him, leave something for Mashiach. And the Rebbe didn't want to tell him, you're a man shake. I didn't capitulate, and I didn't give up an inch, and the Tater doesn't change. In their mind, how do you get along? I'll stop believing what I believe. You'll stop believing what you'll believe. If people don't believe in anything, if you don't believe it, I'm a gleibt in the emes from Tater. Tater doesn't change. So the Rebbe told him, leave something for Mashiach. You can see the video. As the Yidden should get along as a tifezach. Why? Because they believe Taka Mitanemis. If you believe Mitanemis, we're going to be Mivatan your Yikaron, you're going to be Mivatan your principle. It's not push. So anyway, getting back to the point, the Mishnah says, Hashem cannot have a keli, for the bracha he gave Yidden, for the same reason, there's no keli that can hold the Eibishter himself. Leis machshava tfisa bei klal makes sense. Why is there no keli that can hold the Eibishter? Because the Eibishter is believable. So the Mishnah says, why is there no keli that can hold the bracha? The Eibishter has to give Yidden, because the bracha is believable. Allah Shalom. The exception is peace. Why? Because Shalom is bittul. And bittul is really the keli of a non-keli. You're not taking it. Because the minute you're taking it with your hands. You're taking it with your hands, you're taking it with your metzias. I mean figuratively, not literally. So it's a medina of agbol, it's a metzias, it's even a yesh, yeah? But Shalom is surrender. The person is able to let go of his metzias and to open himself up to the bracha that the Eibishter gives without having to take it. That's a kli for believable. Ela Shalom, because Shalom is a kli of bittul. So this is the vard from the Rebbe's Rishimis. You understand? Lei matzah kadosh baruch hu kli b'achar bracha. So there's no vessel that can hold the Eibishter's bracha, because the bracha has no limit except if there is bittul. Now let's go to us, to Tanya. My grandfather used to say, my mother's father, lang gesund, so lang gejor, that the greatest, the most important thing the Jewish people need is shalom. If you want a raya, look how much koiches the Samach Mem puts into the great machlekes. As you don't have shalom, they can also uftan. He used to quote the Maimon Chazal, it's a medrash. That the medrash says that there were 2 days of the biggest rishoyim, that were never punished. Because they had shalom. The day of Flaga, and the day of Achav ben Omri. Achav is one of the malachim that the Mishnah says, Ein lechelik l'mabuch. And he died in his bed. You know, Achav died in his bed. Because he had shalom. At the end of his life, he killed one man, Noves. And this is when the Eibishter, Achav was such a rush. And until the story of Noves, the Eibishter was helpless. You read the malachim, you couldn't do anything. But the Eibishter has a weakness. The Eibishter, you can manipulate the Eibishter. Only problem is we also have a weakness. The Eibishter's weakness is shalom, and our weakness is politics. You understand? If we can figure out how to get along, the Eibishter Kvayochel says he can go nishmach after shalom. Let's talk about the Tanya. Leis machshava tfisa bei klal has a suffix, has an end. In fact, there are 2 suffixes. In other words, leis machshava tfisa bei klal says tikun yidei, right? How do you know? You said it Friday in Pasach Eliyahu. Yeah. If you're free enough on a Friday afternoon to say hey Pasach Eliyahu, so you know that in Pasach Eliyahu it says leis machshava Pasach Eliyahu am rebein omen antu chad lei b'chush antu elah ka'alon. Stephen calls it leis machshava tfisu bei klal. There's antu da afikas asad tikunin v'karin len asad sfiran. Right? Remember? Yeah. But there it says leis machshava tfisu bei klal. Then you have the end of the pedic, the end of the pasuk. It's Zohar. Zohar doesn't have psukim, but the end in the Siddur it's printed with 2 dots. But in Chassidus they bring leis machshava tfisa bei klal, and they have a key im. Just like loy matzah kadosh baruch hu machzik bracha l'Yisrael ella. So there's by leis machshava tfisa bei klal also an ella. There's no way to hold the Eibishter, but there is one way, and there's like 2 ways. It says in Chassidus, not here, not in Tanya, but it says in Samach Vov. Leis machshava tfisa bei klal kim b'reusa deliba. B'reusa deliba. You can't hold the Eibishter unless you have reusa deliba. Reusa deliba is a very, very enigmatic term. The Rebbe in his Rishimis on Tanya writes that there's 4 or 5 different types of reusa deliba that are min hakotza lakotza. There's so many different translations of the word deliba. Ru'usa the Liba basically means, as far as this conversation is concerned, Mesiras Nefesh. If a person has total bittul, you have to learn the Maimon in Samach Vov. It's one of the Chasanim Maimon. The Friedrich Rebbe said this Maimon in Samach Vov by the Rebbe's Chasanim. Margele b'Puma derove is this Maimon. Leis machshava tfisa bei klal ki im beru'usa the Liba. Basically, it says you want to have the Eibishter in Mesiras Nefesh, which is exactly the same thing as Kli Machzi Bracha L'Yisrael Ela Hashalom. How do you hold the Eibishter? The Eibishter is believable. The answer is surrender. As long as you hold on to you, you're a contradiction to the Matthias of the Eibishter. If you have a kli, if you have walls, that you're a vessel, you can't hold the Eibishter because he's believable. Just as you can't hold the Eibishter's bracha klayachol, you can't hold the Eibishter himself. Ki'im be'usa delib. Be'usa deliba, which translates literally as the will of the heart. What that means is a discussion for a different time. But as far as this conversation is concerned, it's inyan of Mesiras Nefesh, or maybe even higher than Mesiras Nefesh, the inyan of Kabbalah Seil. Mesiras Nefesh is one madrege, Kabbalah Seil is a higher madrege, and in Mesiras Nefesh and Kabbalah Seil you can hold Hashem. Listen, make up your mind. Leis machshot visa beklal or yes machshot. It's the same thing as loy matzah kodesh baruch hu kli maxik baruch lisol ella hashalom. You make up your mind. Is there a kli or is there not a kli? And the answer is there is no kli. Yeah, but you just said there is a kli. But don't you understand that this kli is the kli of a non-kli? Right? In other words, just like in ella hashalom, how is peace a kli for baruch of the Eibishter? Because of bittul. You're not a vessel. You're surrendering yourself. The same is true. Leis machshot visa beklal. Because Ru'usa Deliba is an act of surrender, of sacrifice. You have the Eibishter when you let go of yourself completely. This is what says, I guess it's a Zohar. Maybe it's not a Zohar, but it's a Samachov. It says a Samachov for sure, and it says in the man for the Friedrich. I told you, the Friedrich Rebbe said this. He took one of the Maimonides of Samachov, I guess it's Neach, or Lach Lecha, and Imamish took it and he rewrote it. And one of the Chachma, the Rebbe's Chassan is this Maimon. And the Rebbe repeated it also, Toshin Mem. We're going to learn it soon in our Friday Shiyurim. We're going to be learning that Maimed. Margel B'Puma Derav. It's a Mugadika Maimed, and it speaks about the Ina Mesiras Nefesh and how Bittul, Kabbalah Seil, is even higher than Mesiras Nefesh. And he brings this quote: you cannot hold Hashem. That makes sense. But the Ru'usa Deliba, you could hold Hashem. Okay? I'm going to pause here and let you ask me questions and make comments. Okay, what do we have over here? Here we have something different, okay? Now do me a favor, we're going to cheat. Go to page Tes. Go to page Tes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the top. It's the opposite. The opposite of page 16 is Tes. 8 lines from the top of the page. You see it? It's the same page. The other side. Leis, from the beginning of the line. Leis, machshava, tfisa, bei, klal. There is no keli. There's no vessel that can hold the Eibishter, ki'im, but here it doesn't say Ru'usa Deliba. Kasha tfiso mislabeshes beteiro mitzvah. You hold Atzmas Ein Sof, you hold the Eibishter himself when you're learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. Yes, so make up your mind. You're nisht. If I tell you, you cannot put this into any pot except for this one. So I don't have to say, you can't put it into any pot except for this one. I could say, you can put it into this pot. Why the double negative? Loi loi. And the answer is because when you're talking about the Eibishter, it's a fact. There is no kli. You can't hold the Eibishter. But you can hold the Eibishter Torah mitzvahs. Why? Because the Eibishter put himself into Torah mitzvahs. Api seichel, api higoyin, api svara. Logically, there's no vessel that can hold the Eibishter because the Eibishter is believable. And a vessel, by definition, it has walls, it holds. So, Ru'usa Deliba, right, the first idea, you surrender. You stop being you, so you can hold the Eibishter because you let go of your mitzias. When you're doing a mitzvah and you're learning Torah, you're absolutely you. And the mitzvah is very finite, when you get the Kiddush, Tim and Yud. Every mitzvah has a shir. Every mitzvah has a shir. Dafke. And in the shir of each mitzvah, you have Atzmas Ein Sof. The Eibishter himself is in the shir of each mitzvah. Right? If you do a mitzvah too much or too little, it's not a mitzvah. Yeah? If a person doesn't fast 5 parshas in film, it's not the pshat that has more of the Eibishter, he has none of the Eibishter. You have to do it exactly the way Eibishter said, with the Medida of Agbola, a measure, a preciseness, and this measure, this precision, you have Atzmas Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Why? Because the Eibishter put himself there. The Eibishter squeezes himself into Torah and mitzvahs. So even though on the one hand it's a very finite and a very limited thing, so the Rebbe says, but you should know, Hashem himself squeezed himself into a finite space. Okay, are we clear? Verstanden? It wasn't bad, yeah? I think it was clear. Maybe I can't clear, yeah? But I want to say another inyan. And the other inyan is the mashal of Mayim. The Rebbe says, Teira nimshel l'mayim. Teira is compared to what it says in the Pasuk, Hoikol tzama l'chul l'mayim, as they state in Tanya Perek Mem. Right? Teira is compared to water. But here it says, Teira nimshel l'mayim. But not because mayim quenches thirst. Right? It doesn't say, Teira is like water because if you're thirsty you drink, and Teira is life. But because water have a tendency to trickle down from the high point to the low point. That's what water does. Water is a huge pain in the neck. You have water in a leaking pipe. Cancer is verschweigen. If you don't fix them, it's going to keep on leaking. And it's going to make a mess. And its direction is down. Fire rises, wind goes laterally, and water comes down from a high place to a low place. So Teira is like water. It descended from a high place to a low place. And there are two diyukim, two ideas here, one deeper than the next. The first idea is very simple. When water descends from a high place to a low place, it doesn't change. In Chassidus, you have a sugi called shefa. Right? We know shefa from milk, right? Yeah. But in Chassidus, there's a sugi called shefa. Yeah. Shefa means mahus dvar ma. Shefa means something that's given from the parallel of the word shefa is the word mashpia. Just like the parallel of the word oil is the word moil. The shefa and mashpia means I'm giving you a piece of me. Ashtikl zich. Oil comes from the moil, from the source. So on the one hand, everything you have in the source you have in the light. But on the other hand, none of the source is not giving. You take it by itself. It's only a ha'ora. Shefa and mashpia, I'm giving you a piece of me, but it's substantive. It's takashtikl. It's a piece of what I am. Yeah. So the way shefa, what's an example of shefa? An idea is shefa. I have a thought in my head. I worked on it for a month, and I share it with you. Yeah. An emotion, a feeling of love, or some kind of a feeling is shefa. I give you a piece of me. I tell you what I give you out of my emotion. And the same is with chush, right? A piece of art, a piece of music. There's a shtickle mensch. Right? When you draw a painting, when you sing a song, when you write a piece of music, when you do a dance, write poetry, you're giving yourself out. And when Reuven gives Shimon, or whatever it is, Rachel gives Shimona a piece of music, it's a piece of themselves. It's a ha'orah. But the rule is that what is given and what is received are not the same. What is given and what is not the same. If I tell you what I'm learning, and you understand what I'm saying, it's impossible that you should understand it the same way I do. Why? Because we're two different people. So I share the information with you. How do I share the information with you? I use words. Without words, I can't communicate. You take those words and you process those words to extract from the words the meaning behind them. And it's lo yimalat, you hear it different. Doesn't mean you hear it incorrectly, but you hear it different. And the same is true with anything. When I give you, if I have a passion in my heart, an emotion in my heart, and I share it with you, the way you receive it is quite different than the way I gave it. And the same is true chush. If I give you a piece of music, a piece of art, which reveals my mahus, you receive it, you process it, you read it, you hear it, you take it, you internalize it different than it was meant, because we're two different people, yeah? What about a glass of water? Take a shefa. A glass of water. I have a glass of water, and I pour into your cup half of what's in my glass. It's exactly the same. No shini whatsoever. So when you give the mashal of Teira, you don't give the mashal from oil. You don't give the mashal from seichel. You give the mashal from mayim. When the Eibishter gave us the Teira, it's like he poured from his glass into our glass. That Yordam Mokum Gevela Mokum Nomach, the Teira came from heaven to earth. It's exactly the same Teira that the Eibishter has. No difference whatsoever. Now it doesn't look that way. We all understand that in Gan Eden they have a different Sheshin of Yechasapora, they have a different Adar Shoyes LeShabbos, they have a different Abba, Maris Negoyim, everything is like you have in my Marach Sidis, it's different. So the Rebbe says that's exactly the same. Even though the form changes, it's exactly the same thing. It's Mayim. Teira is not oil, it's not light. Teira is not chayis, it's not seichel. Teira is not koyach, it's not energy. Teira is like shefa gashmi, physical substance. Shefa gashmi works, there's no such thing as a order. Physical things I cannot give you and keep. If I have a piece of wood and you need it, if I give it to you, I no longer have it. If I give you an idea, so now you have the idea, but I didn't lose it. If I give you a feeling, so now I didn't lose it. Only in the physical world there is this phenomenon that's it's given exactly what it was. Here, it's here. Teira nimshal mayim. Teira is compared to water. Mayim yedim maknavel maknamo. The Teira you and I learn down here is exactly the same. The tzayini v'chachmasei shal kodesh baruch hu v'chachmasei yechad. The way it is, one with himself without any change, like water. That's what Alter Rebbe uses this mashal, and of course it says a chazal. The Teira is compared to water. Teira nimshal mayim. I have the Rebbe's Rishimis here. So for everything you have a maramokim. It's a Gemara in Masechta Tainis. It's a Gemara in Tainis. It's a Brais in Bava Kama, and so on. Yeah. But the word in any time you use a mashal, a physical mashal for dvarim ruchniim, that's the upside. When you say that the Teira is bread, or the Teira is meat, or the Teira is wine, he brings mind. What if you take from me? It's exactly what I have that you have. But that's only the first point. That's only the first point. The mashal of water, l'cheire, is a lower mashal than the mashal of ideas or feelings or senses. So why do you use a mashal of water? To argue this nekuda that the Teira we receive is exactly the Teira that the Eibishter has. There's no difference whatsoever the Kvel is by the Eibishter and as it is by us. But there's another nekuda. And this nekuda is even deeper than the first nekuda. What's the second nekuda? What's the second nekuda? Second nekuda, that when water goes from a high place to a low place, it's no longer in the high place. It leaves the high place. And it descends to the low place, and now it's found only in the low place. Okay, now I want to repeat so we have clear the two ideas. The first idea of why you use a mashal of water for Teira is that you get exactly what the Eibishter gives, just like water. You get exactly whatever the Eibishter has. Based on the tzayini v'chachmasei, Teira is the baruch hu v'chachmasei yechad. And I said has exactly the Eibishter's Teira the way it is in Atzmos and Hus. We have precisely, exactly the same Teira like water. But there's another point, that when water cascades from the top of a mountain into the valley, it's no longer in the mountain. It can't be in both places at the same time. What's the nimshal? The nimshal is that the Teira that we have down here, which of course is the Teira that teaches us how to do mitzvahs. Right, Aliba de Hilchas, how to paskin halacha, do mitzvahs, is only down here. In other words, in addition to the idea that the Teira we're learning is mamish the Eibishter, it's exactly as the Kriyachal is one with the Eibishter. There is a second idea that the Teira you and I have, they don't have in Gan Eden. They don't have it in Gan Eden. They don't have it in Ilvas Hayenim. They don't have it in Atzilus. You know why? Because it's Mayim. That when the water descends from a high place to a low place, it's only down here. So this second point is deeper than the first point. The first point is simply saying it's the same. As much as it changes, it's exactly the same. The second point is saying it comes from a high place to a low place and it's only down here. What's the difference in the 2 points? The difference between the 2 points is the first point is talking about the Seichel HaTeira. The ideas in the Teira, Limud HaTeira. Limud HaTeira have Gan Eden nos. They're smarter than us, they verstehen besser. Yeah. Limud HaTeira have Gan Eden nos. So you should know it's Mayim, Yerdim, Mok Novel, Mok Malach. You may be learning Teira on a simple level, and in the physical world, it's exactly the same Teira learning in Gan Eden, Batilus, and so on. And then number 2, the idea that Teira is connected to halacha, to practical mitzvahs. And here you have a second idea. Not only is it exactly the same Teira they have Lamaila, it's Yardam Imakum Kaveda. Visham Nosa Yarda Besesa Madrigas, Madriga, Madriga, Achin stops your bottom and gash, and it's only here. It's not Lamaila. The Teira we learn here, they can't learn it. That's why the Rebbe says in the Maimer, Basi Lagani, no. Ayesheves Baganim, Chaverim, Akshivim, Lokela Chashmiyi, the Nishamas in Gan Eden, and Malachim Al Yenim, and Kvayachal, the Eibishter himself, comes to listen to the Piskei Din of a Bezdin Shalmat. The Gemara that everybody knows, right? If we give him a sifted the Rakia, Sofik say Allah and Kodmo Baheres. No Kotchabrecho Amar Kach, and a sifted the Rakia Amar Kach, Man Nechach, Nachmeni. There's a Gemara, it's brought in Likutei Torah. There's a machlokes between Kutsha B'richu. Who's Kutsha B'richu? Kutsha B'richu. And Mesivta Derekia. If you have a case, Amaisa mit Negoyim. Who's worried about Negoyim? Suffolk, but say Love and Trade Love Aheres. Right, when a person becomes Tomei, so you have a white discoloration. But you're not Tomei unless you have another siman with the white discoloration. One is Pishayon, if it grows. Another is if you have Mechya, if you have a little bit of healthy skin in the middle of this coloration, it's a siman of Tumah. And the third is Seyalov, little white hairs that grow in the place of the Nega, yeah? But the white hairs have to appear after the Tzaras, not before. What happens, a person has a Tzaras, and they have white hair, but they're not sure when the white hair grew. Did they grow before or after? So is he tummy or not tummy? It's a suffix. And you know, in London, there's two types of svekis. One kind of suffix is, you don't know, but somebody else knows. And there's a suffix, now this suffix, you could say that somebody once knew. Theoretically, you could have looked at your hand and say, oh, I grew white here. And then the next day, yeah, and the Rabbi Banachmeni was a neshama beguf paskin the shayla. And then there's a whole cloud whether Allah has like Kutchabrichu like Mesifte. It is different shittas that he's showing him. Whether you paskin like the Eibishter, Kutchabrichu, Mesifte the Kiyah. In other words, you paskin like Rabbi Banachmeni, you don't paskin Rabbi Banachmeni. Because Torah was given to everybody. Halacha is dafka lamat. The Piskei did it, the Bezin Shalmata, this is the, you know, the Gemara brings, the Chazeki kocht in the roof, Natschune, bonai natschune. When the Chachamim have an argument, and a baskel comes out of the heaven and says, Aloha ben Hurkinus. Lach ben Hurkinus. And the Meshuvah Chananya says, Teira leba shamayimi, nobody asked you. A voice comes from heaven, and the Hebish to laugh, Kachayach, Ka'omar, Natschune, bonai, defeat me. Because Teira is down here. This is the deeper aspect of Teira Nimshal Alamayim. It's not only the Teira Nimshal Alamayim, Teira with the water, that we have exactly the same Teira that they have, but it's only here. It's not Lamayim. Okay, we will take a break, and then we're going to learn the Mitzvah Shema Maimed. Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Yo, Psudas Tevis.